Welcome back to another edition of Dave Smith Unleashed. And once again, thanks to all the subscribers. Thanks to all of you who go to the YouTube page, to the Dave Smith Unleashed page, and subscribe and share and comment and support us every step of the way. And of course, how could we not start this show without thanking our great sponsor, MTS Transportations, for all your freight shipping and trucking needs. And without MTS Transportations, our good friends over there, there would be no Dave Smith Unleashed. So great thanks to them, as always. And always remember, 20% off on all your freight shipping and trucking needs if you call MTS Transportations and mention Dave Smith Unleashed. You know, watching the World Series here, and it's certainly looking like, with the Dodgers splitting in Toronto and the next three in Los Angeles, it's certainly looking like the Dodgers are going to win back-to-back World Series. And watching the great exploits of Shohei Ohtani and the 3 home runs in that closeout game against Milwaukee and another home run in the World Series here so far, a generational talent, doing things even Babe Ruth didn't do in his prime as far as pitching and hitting. And then I started thinking about... remember the gambling investigation into Shohei Ohtani and his interpreter, translator, Ippei Mizuhara. And, of course, the shenanigans with this fraudulent baseball investigation that cleared Shohei of everything. I've never believed it. I've never believed the narrative. I believe the initial narrative, not the changed one that came out when the Dodgers and Major League Baseball started their investigation. I'll get into that momentarily, but one of the reasons I don't believe anything is because I don't believe any of the investigations that go on by these fraudulent professional sports leagues. They're more cover-ups, covering their asses and protecting themselves and protecting their superstars than it is trying to get to the actual truth. Well, look at Michael Jordan back in the day. Michael Jordan was a degenerate gambler, and it was becoming a real problem for the National Basketball Association. You know, going to casinos on game night, staying out all night, gambling, playing poker, running up massive gambling debts, which, of course, puts the integrity of the league at stake, because when one of your players has a gambling debt that big, you know, he's vulnerable to maybe doing some shady things to get himself right with the bookmakers, with the bookies. And then, of course, in my opinion, they made up that story about, well, Michael, it was always his dream to play baseball, and he's doing it for his father. You know, the tragedy when his father was murdered in driving through North Carolina. But I never believed that narrative that he wanted to play baseball. I think, you know, I think he met with David Stern, and they told him this thing, the lid's about to blow off this thing. We don't want to suspend you because, you know, Michael was the golden goose and the brand name of the NBA and brought in billions of dollars in advertising and merchandise sales. They were never going to suspend him. So, of course, the solution was to take a year or two off, just get away from this thing and let it cool off, which I think is the real story of what happened. You know, another bogus investigation. Another bogus bullshit investigation by the NBA was Tim Donaghy, the Tim Donaghy officiating scandal. Now, Tim, very good friend of the Dave Smith Show. He's been on as a guest several times over the years. I actually like him. I like his honesty because he'll answer any question. You can ask him anything you want, and he's pretty forthright about taking responsibility and everything that happened with him. But there's no way he acted alone in this. That is complete nonsense. The FBI and the investigation had records of hundreds and hundreds of phone calls that he made to other referees, mostly to Scott Foster, minutes before a game would start. And, you know, covering the Lakers over the years and covering the NBA and traveling with the Lakers for a short time, you know, I spoke with people who would know. Executives in front offices, reporters who've covered the NBA for years, people who would know, legal representatives of teams. They said this thing was so big. Not only was it Tim Donaghy, it was other referees, it was players involved, it was coaches, it was general managers, it was owners, it was media. This thing was a huge scandal. And, of course, remember David Stern's press conference? They did about a 15-minute investigation. One man acting alone, lone wolf, nothing to see here, case closed. It's all Tim Donaghy. Blamed it all on Tim, which I think anybody with a working, rational brain knows that's complete and total bullshit on the National Basketball Association. There's no way Tim Donaghy was acting alone in this. But, of course, he took the fall, and, you know, he obviously made mistakes and deserved to take a fall. But it went far beyond him. And never forget this. The NBA hired a retired FBI agent as their investigator. And by the way, this retired FBI agent was the same guy who Mark Cuban hired to investigate the referees after the 2006 NBA Finals, when Mark thought the series was rigged when the Heat shot so many more free throws than the Dallas Mavericks. Anyway, the same retired FBI agent, after the Donahue thing was settled, shortly afterwards, he was interviewed and he said, notice that the internal investigation by the NBA has never been released, which is true. And he said, if the internal investigation was ever released, the NBA's internal investigation, they'd have to shut the league down for good and there'd be no more NBA. That's how big and that's how bad this was. And I agree. From people I've spoken with, I agree 1,000%. So why should we believe, the Major League Baseball quote unquote investigation of Shohei Ohtani and Ippei Mizuhara? Now, we all know the story. Ippei was brought in as Shohei's interpreter and kind of assistant, whatever you want to call him. They were together about 24 hours a day. He was with him all the time. He interpreted for him. He actually went to the bank and helped Shohei open up his first bank account in America with him, being in charge of allegedly handling all the money, which is unbelievable. So here's the story we were told. Ippei was making bets. He's a degenerate gambler. He lost $40 million in bets in total, and he stole $17 million from Shohei Ohtani by shuffling money around and doing wire transfers of Shohei's money and impersonating him on the phone and fooling and tricking banks into thinking he was actually Shohei, which is complete nonsense as far as I'm concerned. Now, let's get to the genesis of this. Remember the original story that was broken on ESPN? In the original story, Ippei Mizuhara was making bets on planes, on hotels, at his house, with Shohei Ohtani's complete knowledge. Ippei said Ohtani had knowledge and actually helped him send the funds. Now, did Ohtani make bets himself? I hope not. There's never been any evidence that Shohei himself was gambling. But if his closest associate and best friend and the guy who handles his business was making hundreds of millions of dollars in bets and stealing $17 million from him, well, of course, that's going to set off red flags all over the place with Major League Baseball, you would think, because the integrity of the game is at stake. If you get a guy so far in the hole and he's financing some guy making hundreds of millions of dollars of bets and he's losing, well, then he's vulnerable to maybe being compromised himself. Well, that was the original story, which I believe was the true one. That Shohei had knowledge that he was shuffling all this money around and it was a loan and he was going to be paid back and he actually helped him open up a bank account. Well, then remember the story changed after that. After the investigation started, well, now Shohei had no knowledge of anything that was going on and was taken completely by surprise. He's a babe in the woods. He knows nothing. He's an idiot. Now, the real truth, of course, in my opinion, he's that $700 million contract he signed with the Dodgers. He's baseball's golden goose. And if Shohei is caught in a gambling scandal, it hurts the integrity of Major League Baseball. And by the way, how can somebody not know that he had $17 million stolen and wired from his bank account over 18 months? Now, I can see maybe if it happened once or twice. But this happened 34 times with $500,000 shifted around over 18 months. And he never knew, Shohei, his business manager, his agent, his accountants, the bank itself, red flags didn't go up all over the place. I just find it absolutely impossible to believe. Agents, bookkeepers, financial people, accountants, nobody knew anything. And as I said before, Ippei helped Shohei open a bank account with direct deposit. And then when some of Shohei's people, some of his financial people, wanted Ippei to explain what was going on, why they couldn't have access to his accounts to see what was going on, he said, well, Shohei wants it to be private. Shohei doesn't want you to see anything. Yeah, sure. Let's take a break. Let's pay some bills here, and let's hear from our good friends at MTS Transportations. Dave Smith Unleashed brought to you by MTS Transportations. And mention the Dave Smith Unleashed podcast and get 20% off on your next shipment for all your shipping, trucking, and freight needs. There's only one business to call, and that's MTS Transportations at 800-640-6873. MTS Transportations, 800-640-6873. We're back here on the Dave Smith Show talking about did baseball cover up the Shohei Ippei Mizuhara gambling scandal? Was it another cover-up a la Michael Jordan? a la Tim Donaghy. And I'm telling you this right now. This new gambling scandal with Terry Rozier and Chauncey Billups and Damon Jones and the rest, I guarantee you we'll never get to the bottom of this. The NBA will never allow us to know what was really going on. It'll be a BS investigation, and a couple of patsies will take the fall. But I bet the real heavyweights, the real big people, will never be implicated. Now, here's a question I would have. Ippei Mizuhara, evidently, he would call the banks, and he'd pretend to be Shohei and kind of disguise his voice and said he wanted to transfer money, and he transferred $500,000 34 different times. Now, I want to know, were these calls made in English? And if they're made in English, it couldn't be Shohei because he doesn't speak very good English. Well, Ippei is fluent in English. And here's another thing that I did through my research. Banks have something called a device ID, and they know exactly who it is that's calling. They knew it was Ippei making the call, asking for the wire transfers. And it's also recorded. So how about releasing what the recording sounded like when he was transferring money? Was it him? Was he speaking in English? Was it him pretending to be Shohei and speaking in broken English, and maybe they got somebody who spoke Japanese at the bank on the phone? I'd sure like to hear those recordings, wouldn't you? And I read the 37-page federal case here on this, and I'm more convinced than ever this is complete bullshit. And that Shohei had full knowledge what was going on, and full knowledge that Ippei was making bets with his money. Now, again, did Shohei bet himself? Again, I hope not. There's no evidence that he did, but who knows? I read a really interesting column in the New York Post by Phil Mushnick. Quote, about this whole situation. How can somebody unilaterally be granted millions in credit from bookies who had no knowledge that his collateral was independent of Ohtani? Now, that is huge right there. If you're going to make bets with a bookie and they don't know that your collateral is dependent on Shohei Ohtani, he didn't have enough money to cover those bets. They had to know who was behind this. They had to know who was bankrolling him. And here's another question. How thorough was the Major League Baseball investigation? Because the NBA never does thorough investigations. They swept the Donaghy case under the rug. They lied about the Michael Jordan situation. And dollars to donuts, you bet your ass we're not going to be told the truth about this latest NBA gambling scandal, the Rozier, Billups, Damon Jones thing with the setups with the poker games, stealing money from people. And the mafia is involved in that. See, that's another thing with Tim Donaghy. The mafia was involved in that one, too, the Gambino crime family. That's another reason why the NBA tried to cover it up. Now, here's another quote from that New York Post article about the Shohei Ohtani situation, about how thorough it was. They did an interview with an anonymous, he didn't really give his name, but a senior executive and compliance officer and investigator in one of New York City's largest financial firms. So this is a guy with some gravitas. This is the guy who would know about the banking and loaning and wire transfer industry. And he started the interview off by saying, well, first of all, before the interview started, this man said he predicted that Major League Baseball would give Ohtani a pass because they can't bring down Shohei Ohtani. You know how much money worldwide? Now, this isn't just an American star. This is a worldwide star. Asia, Japan, South America, Europe. He's so popular all over the world, including America. The money that Shohei brings in with merch and advertising and branding, the hats and the shirts and everything with his name is in the billions of dollars for Major League Baseball. Of course they're not going to bust him. It's like Michael Jordan back in the day on a 10 times bigger scale. Okay. Senior executive and compliance officer investigator in a large East Coast financial firm, New York City. Here's what he had to say about this investigation of Ohtani. Here's a quote. Whenever you transfer an amount larger than $10,000, that triggers as an SAR, and an SAR means suspicious activity report. Suspicious activity report is received if any wire transfer larger than $10,000 occurs. It's reported, It's documented by, quote, multiple layers of bank management. This is called a must-comply matter. 34 transfers of $500,000 of $17 million to a known bookmaker, and nobody noticed? Impossible, says the bank executive, and says Dave Smith. And finally, he said, the pattern here screams fraud. Fraud. Red flags everywhere. I've never believed, as I said, a word of this horse shit about the investigation of Shohei. And I don't believe a word when Shohei says he knew nothing about it. Now, again, did he gamble himself? In my opinion, probably not. And I would hope he didn't. But the initial report said he knew exactly what was going on. He knew exactly the money that was being withdrawn, and he considered it a loan. He knew that Ippei had a gambling problem. And then, of course, after the shit hit the fan with the ESPN report originally, then the second explanation came out. Then the new report came out. Well, so he was a babe in the woods. He knew nothing. He was Sergeant Schultz from Hogan's Heroes. I know nothing. I see nothing. I hear nothing. Had no knowledge. Now, to me, it's freaking impossible for your best friend, your interpreter, somebody you've known for years, and somebody who's around you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is stealing $17 million from you and doing wire transfers and defrauding banks, and you didn't know anything about it. $17 million was missing. His accountants didn't have questions. His financial people didn't have questions. His agent didn't have questions. The freaking bank allowed 34 transfers of $500,000 each with some joker on the phone pretending to be somebody. I got to try that. I'm going to look up some billionaire. I'm going to call his bank and change my voice and pretend to be him and wire transfer like $100 million into my account. If it's this easy, maybe I can do it. Maybe it'll work. But again, my question to all of you out there following me on Dave Smith Unleashed, go to the YouTube page, Dave Smith Unleashed, and hit the comment section. First of all, subscribe and comment and share, and then go to the comment box and say, do you believe that baseball covered up the Shohei Ippei gambling scandal because they didn't want the real truth to get out, as I do? And go to my Twitter page, @DaveSportsGuy. If you want to know when the next Dave Smith is going to be released, who the guests are going to be, what time, what day, always follow me on X. Go to @DaveSportsGuy. So once again, great thanks to our sponsors. Well, I love MTS Transportations, without whom this show would not be possible. So great thanks to them, as always, for making Dave Smith Unleashed podcast happen. And, of course, all you subscribers who comment and share and give us all kinds of support. Man, we're getting more subscribers and more interest every day. So thanks to all of you once again. And we'll talk to you next time right here on Dave Smith Unleashed.